what's going on, everybody? We have a special guest with us here today who is going to introduce the Carbon Neutral Coalition, a group out of Texas. This is Bobby Tudor. Bobby has an extensive background in energy, 20 years at Goldman. He founded Tudor, Pickering, Holt Company and is now the CEO of Artemis Energy, as well as sitting on the board of HEDI, which is the Houston Energy Transition Initiative. I got to make sure I get that right. And Bobby is also on the board of the Carbon Neutral Coalition. Bobby, we're super excited to have you join us in today's conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, guys. I'm very happy to be here. This is interesting stuff, so look forward to diving in.
Yeah, that's quite a resume, and thank you at this early stage of the morning for making us feel really, really inadequate with our life choices and what we've accomplished.
My resume is like a bullet.
Yeah, that's right. The fact that you remembered everything you just said was really impressive. Good stuff. Yeah, Carbon Neutral Coalition. I mean, so Bobby, really give a quick introduction to yourself, if you don't mind, and then tell us all about
Sure.
the Carbon Neutral Coalition.
Yeah, well, look, I'm an energy finance guy by background. Spent 20 years working in the energy group at Goldman Sachs, and then left and started TPH, Tudor, Pickering, Holt Company. Was an investment bank focused exclusively on the energy industry. And I retired from TPH at the end of this last calendar year, and now am focused just on energy investing and on working on the policy front with groups like the Carbon Neutral Coalition and HEDI, the Houston Energy Transition Initiative. There's just so much going on in the energy world right now that demands our attention, and I'm very happy to be in a position to help where I can, and so I'm doing a lot of that right now.
Yeah, so the CNC's stated mission is to help make Texas carbon neutral by 2050. So we'll put you on the spot a little bit. How are we doing? How far along are we? Are we on the right path?
Well, look, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And I am certainly of the view that the world is going to need fossil fuel production for a very long time, if not indefinitely. But it's also clear that we need to do that in a way, not just produce it, but also ultimately use it in a way that dramatically and quickly drives down CO2 emissions. And so Corby Robertson pulled together this group called the Carbon Neutral Coalition. It's a cross sections of leaders in Texas who come from the energy business, but also from the ranching business. There are royalty owners. There are environmental groups. It's basically all the stakeholders who would touch CCUS in any form or fashion. And who have an interest in ultimately helping us in Texas get to a carbon neutral economy. That group has been pulled together to work on these issues because the issues are difficult, and we have a long way to go to have everything in place that we need to have a functioning CCUS business and a business that will lead to a carbon neutral economy in Texas.
So how many years into this goal are we right now? The 2050, are you guys getting started here in the last year, or has this been in the works for a while?
Yeah, it's early stage. It's not as if no work was going on previous to the last year or two, but I do think the last year or two we have sort of coalesced in a way that's new and different, and we're bringing together kind of the various groups that ultimately need to have a say. Because we need their expertise, and so that's happening kind of broadly in the country. It's certainly happening here in Texas. That's what Carbon Neutral Coalition is. It's also what the Houston Energy Transition Initiative is. So it's bringing together all the constituents and connecting the dots, because the nature of this dual challenge, and when I say the dual challenge, I mean providing reliable and affordable energy today, while at the same time rapidly and dramatically driving down our CO2 emissions. The nature of that challenge is such that it has to be an all hands on deck kind of thing. And that's what we're after.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that, and we're always happy to hear that. I always love when people say, "Oh, eliminate fossil fuels." I don't think people realize how much it impacts everyday life and everything that we do. But you talk about the CCUS, and that's so from our perspective, from the audience that we reach out to here. We're focused on the supply side of CO2. As you noted, we talk about it as being an ingredient, an integral part of a lot of manufacturing or production processes. food processing from beginning to end of that entire process. And as the breadbasket of the world and as the meat producer of the world, it's vital to what we do. So when we talk about CCS, just pure sequestration or storage, we forget about that U in there. We forget about that
Right.
usage. And so we're always looking for what are those constructive uses of CO2? How can
Right.
we do that? So where are you all on and might be within the realm and not within the realm of what you all work on, but being in Texas and the energy producer of the world at that, where are you on biofuels or alternative uses and aviation fuel, biodiesels, things like that?
Yeah. So we're really very much taking an all of the above kind of approach. And ideally, we think to the degree there are economic uses of the captured CO2, it's going to make capturing CO2 a bigger and better business and a more effective one for driving down emissions. So having good economic uses for the captured CO2 is absolutely central to ultimately having a good and functioning market. Now, for that to happen, we ultimately need to have a price on it, and in some cases there is a price for the captured CO2, but on the whole there is not really, and so that's one important milestone we need to get to. But while we do have current uses for CO2, and you mentioned some of them, I think part of the goal here is to dramatically expand the uses of the captured CO2 across a whole range of things. And there's fantastic work going on in the advanced material space, for example. So whether it's building materials with new forms of concrete or otherwise, where captured CO2 can be put to use economically. That's what we need. That's what we need a lot more of. And so, an important sort of linkage here is a linkage between the industry and the politicians and the legislative bodies with our research engines and our research enterprises. So our universities, our national energy labs, the whole material sciences industry, those groups need to be working together as well, to help us turn this captured CO2 into more and more economical uses.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and so I really like how you mentioned the coalition is made up of a number of parties, everybody with an interest. Does that include users of CO2? Do we have representation of that voice in the group to say, hey,
Yeah.
don't forget about us? Exactly what Jeff is saying. We have to make sure we have access to CO2. And then part two to that question: is it a tiered approach where first we're just going to go ahead and store or sequester that CO2, and while research is taking place, identify new options? Or is it happening at the same time? We've got utilization over here, and we've got storage on the other
Yeah,
hand.
no, it's happening at the same time, for sure, and we do have those players at the table in Texas who are current consumers of the captured CO2, and you mentioned several of them, and the ag world is a good example of that, where it's obviously used at scale in the ag world. It's used in the exit oil and gas business, uh, but we need those uses to expand, and in advanced materials is one we really very much have our eye on, but
Yeah.
because the applications of advanced materials across the economy are, or at least in theory, just really really great, and so we're working every corner of this problem, but the more uses we can find for the captured CO2, the better. It's just going to make the projects more economic, uh, and and it's going to lead to more projects, more captured CO2, and lower emissions.
Yeah, talk to me about that a little bit because I've read a little bit about the polymers and plastics and things like that. Those seem way more viable long term than the concrete side, simply because that's where we all default to concrete every time we talk about
Yeah.
capture and things like that. And it's great. It's a great use. It's just I mean the plants itself generate more CO2 than they could possibly use in the generation of the blocks. But it's a great application. We need more. What are some of those that you're seeing and that
Well,
you're
polymers. You mentioned polymers, and polymers it's just a humongous market, right?
yeah.
And it's a big problem. Not only are a lot of CO2 emissions sort of created in the building and construction of polymers. But then we also have a separate waste stream that in many cases is very, very hard to recycle and creates a whole set of environmental problems on its own. So there's a ton of great work going on around using advanced materials in the polymers world that will lead to true kind of end to end, full cycle sustainable plastics. And we think that the application of CO2 to that world is potentially really, really vast.
Yeah.
So, that's another one. Concrete is as you mentioned, it's an obvious one, but building materials of all sorts actually, can ultimately sort of use this technology. And we're in a world where having more sustainable building materials is really, really desirable.
Yeah, no, that's I totally agree. That's I think we said it last week, but necessity is the mother of innovation, and we have all this CO2. The idea of just continuously putting it back in the ground and somebody paying for it isn't the broad answer in the long term. And
No, that can't be the long term answer. It shouldn't be the long term answer, right? I mean, and look, uh, the good news is, at least here in Texas, we've got great geology for actually storing the stuff. And so we can do that, and we can do it in size, and we can do it quickly once we get the whole regulatory regime in place for to allow for it. But that's not the highest and best use of the CO2, right? The highest and best use of the CO2 is to be put to work in other industrial, applications, and that's just going to require a lot more innovation uh, and and people taking risk around it is also going to require a lot of capital. And one of the big challenges of the energy transition in general, and certainly of CCUS, is just the amount of capital required to get these projects done is very, very large. And so we need to have the conditions in place to attract the capital to do it. And the more that we have good uses for the captured CO2 that are economic, the more capital we're going to be able to attract to the projects to get the projects done.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into my next question, right? You mentioned universities earlier, and but is Texas welcoming in this new research, right? Is there already a lot of this research taking place, and even outside of the university level, maybe private research? What are you seeing in Texas right now? And there must be something for you, to be so excited about new polymers and new materials.
Yeah, no, there's great work, happening. So for example, here in Houston, the Welch Foundation just recently made a $100 million gift to Rice University to start a new institute for advanced materials,
Wow.
where basic and other applied research will be done uh, to attack this problem specifically. And one of the things I like to remind people is that so many of the challenges of the energy transition are really about molecules, right? And it's less about electrons at this point because we know how to electrify things, but it's more about molecules, and that's where we in Texas shine, right? We have more chemical engineers per capita than any other state in the union by a very long shot. We have industries because of the chemical and petrochemical industry that are already here with very large R&D footprints. We have them working this problem. We have world-class universities in Rice and UT and A&M and University of Houston and Prairie View and others who are doing applied research in this space. So it is a space where we in Texas, frankly, should be a leader. The pieces are in place for us to be a leader. And we just got to make sure that we don't squander that.
No, that makes a lot of sense because you look at I don't know I see a lot of initiatives coming out of California, even New York, but they kind of tout themselves as being that green leader, but theirs are more just disincentives. It's saying we must do we must have no more CO2 and no more fossil fuel cars by 2030, but that's not leading. That's just setting a standard and hoping that
Yeah.
somebody does something about it. You guys are investing in it and driving it, and
Yeah, leading means attacking the problems,
Absolutely, yeah.
right? And that ultimately means finding practical solutions to these challenges. And practical solutions means economic solutions, right? So we're only going to we're only going to ultimately be able to change our energy systems to cleaner energy systems to the degree that we can do it in an economic way so that it is cost competitive with extant systems,
Yeah,
right?
so
Because we have a dual challenge here. As I said in the beginning, we have to provide reliable and affordable and secure energy today while at the same time driving down CO2 emissions. And that means we have to drive down the cost associated with driving down CO2 emissions. And that involves, a million different things, but CCUS is one component of that, and a really important one.
So what bills, what initiatives are you looking at right now that are in front of the Congress there, in front of your political leaders that we should be following? What should we be aware of? What do you need the biggest push on
Well,
behind
there
it?
are, there are a whole range of issues here in CCUS in particular that need to be addressed. And the good news is, via the recent congressional action related to the IRA, uh, the subsidy for a project has been kind of dramatically enlarged, right? So if you kind of check all the boxes, now you can get up to $85 a ton as opposed to $45 a ton. And that in and of itself will make a lot of projects economic in a way that they weren't economic before. So that's a good start. However, that only matters to the degree you can get the projects permitted and built, right? And so that involves, if you're going to sequester it, that involves these class 6 wells, of which there's, I think, only one in the country, at the moment. So we gotta streamline that process so that you can get class 6 wells permitted. It also involves a lot of kind of unknown legal issues. So, for example, in the sequestering side of the business, once it's sequestered, who owns the liability associated with that, right? And what happens when that CO2 migrates below ground, and who owns the liability associated with, there are all kind of issues like that have to get resolved before we're going to have sequestering projects on a large scale.
Right.
We also will have to build out a lot more CO2 related infrastructure, CO2 pipelines, for example. So that stuff has to get permitted, and then you ultimately have to get the captured CO2 piped to where you're going to use it or sequester it. And we need a streamlined process to make that happen quickly. So there's a lot to figure out here, that is going to require the involvement of the legislature and industry. But the Carbon Neutral Coalition is meant to bring those groups together to try to help move the ball down the field as quickly as we can.
Yeah, I've heard 7 to 10 years minimum to get a class 6 well permitted. If that even remotely close.
Yeah, I mean that's what it is right now, and we're kind of saying, well, that's not good enough. I mean, if our challenge is as dire as we all think it is, and we really do need to drive down CO2 emissions quickly, we can't wait 7 to 10 years to permit a well that will allow us to sequester.
Yeah,
Right,
remove the well.
so that's a good example of where we need regulatory reform.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Well, hey, that's first off, thank you for your time. We really appreciate you coming on. But I would kind of summarize my thoughts on it like this: that we talk a lot about sequestration, how it's going to impact it, and all 45Q and IRA and all these things. But what you guys are doing is what's needed most now is pushing the legislation. Like it's great to say it, but if we
Right.
can't get out of our own way, then none of it happens anyway. And like you just said, there's only one class 6 well permitted so far. I think I hear one's coming online in about 2 years. I know down in your region, you got one going out in the Gulf underwater. That could be 10 years out.
Right.
So all these things sound great, but they're not going to help until we push some of these things. So
Yeah.
anything we can do to help in our small scale, we'd love to be a part of that as well.
Well, thanks, and you guys doing a good job of raising awareness around these issues broadly. As I said, this is all hands on deck kind of proposition. where we need all corners of our society, working towards making this happen. But it's important to remember that this is a dual challenge, right? We need to be making all this happen while at the same time we provide reliable, affordable, and secure energy to people today. And there are still, literally, billions. There's 1 billion people around the world who live in dire energy poverty, and we got to serve them too, right? And we got to serve them quickly. So there's a great sense of urgency around all of this, and we all have to work together to address the problem.
Yeah, well, Bobby and the Carbon Neutral Coalition doing more than just talking, taking action, having the right people together. Please keep pushing forward. We certainly appreciate your efforts, and we're gonna set lofty goals. We're gonna build out the framework to accomplish them, and ultimately that's how we do achieve carbon neutrality instead of just talking.
Got to do difficult things.
Have to do difficult things. So, Bobby, Thank you so much, sir. We appreciate it. Hope you all enjoyed this episode. We'll catch up soon.
Thanks for having me, guys.